Hello chess friends and welcome to your Zarov's chess channel and welcome to the very important tournament that's played now these days. It's of course the Mystery Engine chess tournament, and the Mystery Engine is an engine that joined the show recently, and it's been revealed that it is the Komodo NNUE version, so it's similar to the Stockfish NNUE version, and this Komodo plays also really great chess so far. Stockfish is on the first place, Komodo NNUE is on the second place, and for some Lila C0 fanboys, unfortunately for them, they are really Lila C0 fanboys, I cannot believe it. Lila C0 is only on the fourth place, so it is maybe now a new era that we'll see with this Komodo NNUE and Stockfish NNUE versions. As I said, it's just too early to say something. We'll see how everything will make progress, but for us chess lovers, it's of course good that the developers are really working hard on the engines, and we can really just enjoy the chess. So today, it's the derby of the day. It's of course Komodo NNUE versus Stockfish NNUE. Stockfish played here with the white pieces, and as usually in the top engine games, we say round 1 and fight. So Stockfish opens with knight to f3, d5, we have d4, e6, bishop to f4. So London system setup here by Stockfish NNUE, and it's really cool to see that Stockfish goes now more and more positionally into the game, not with this brutal force attacks. It's now getting more prophylactic, I think, which is really great for us, because I think the games are more understandable. It's not all about tactics and that we can calculate what happens if that happens. I think we can really see also some common strategies in the game. So Komodo NNUE played the most aggressive c5, which is of course perfectly fine to break the position. We have c3, knight to c6, and now e3. The common London system setup, and here knight to f6, really natural moves, knight from b to d2, still common theory, and now c takes d5, c takes d4, and you always have to recapture, I think, here with the e-pawn. C takes d4 is not so powerful, I think, because in some occasions when I used to studied in London, and when I tried sometimes c takes d4, I faced really sometimes some tactical threats on the c file. So I think the position is getting too symmetrical. First of all, we should notice that this pawn structure is symmetrical, so that's why you don't have, I think, so many attacking opportunities. So e takes d4, we have knight to h5, chasing a little bit the bishop, which is of course the main strength of the London system setup. If you try bishop to g5, this bishop still can be kicked away with f6, so that's why here in this move, Stockfish played the move bishop to e3, and now bishop to d6. Now comes knight to e5, using this discovered attack on the knight. So far, taking out the knight is not possible because you get a double attack on the bishop and also on the knight, so you lose one piece. So that's why g6, and we have now knight to d3. Castling, and now g3. Very important move here because a common bishop to e2 can be met maybe with knight to f6, and maybe then afterwards with a potential knight to e4 could be also tricky, although you get maybe some double pawns, but then black could create a pawn storm here on the king side, so that's why here Stockfish develops the bishop on this long diagonal with the move bishop to g2. Knight to f3 was played in between, but now after f6, bishop to g2. And okay, let's stop and evaluate the position immediately, because it's obvious that it's really a complex position. This pawn structure a little bit is weird here in front of the king, but what black has here as the main strength is of course the pawn central control, which means black has a pawn on the e file and also on the d file. What black wants to do, that's why this preparation with the move f6 is a very important one, because we want to play the move e5 and get two pawns connected. If you wouldn't have maybe the f6 here and you play e5, I just wanted to imagine without the move f6, then you risk to have always an isolated pawn in the center. So that's why f6 with e5, very nice pawn breakthrough, but so far e5 is not possible. e5 would be a mistake, which loses the game immediately for white. That's why this bishop to g2 is much more powerful than to develop the bishop to e2, as we mentioned in the beginning. So after e5, we can simply take, and we can even take the pawn here on e5, because there are now several tactical threats here. Bishop to e5, knight to e5, but now queen to d5, and we have a very nice fork on the king and the rook, and you lose too much material. Even in this particular move, if you try knight takes e5, then again the same thing happens with queen to d5. So far e5 is not possible. That's a very important moment of the game, because you see now how Stockfish will simply make progress against this e5 pawn breakthrough, because the e5 is the main idea of blacks, and the white simply counterplays prophylactic moves against this idea. So it's very important here to realize, because although the bishop is protecting the e6, the e6 pawn is also long-term weakness, because first of all the e file is open and it's a backward pawn, and we should always try to beat the backward pawn. We should simply play against the backward pawn, and it's very important, because this is the main strategy. Black wants to advance the backward pawn, white wants to counterplay this idea. So the main strategies are very applied here. That's why I really love this game. So knight to g7, castling, g5, very aggressive move by Komodo NNUE, and now we have c4, and this move c4 has been played one time in chess history and in international master level, so it hasn't been played so many times, and this is really an interesting idea by Stockfish NNUE, because we have now, of course, the tension here on this long diagonal. The bishop is, of course, not directly but indirectly attacking the rook on a8, so that's why here knight to e7, trying to get blockade, and in the game we have b3. Okay, what to do here? If you try g4, it's not so good. It liberates the long diagonal. You may ask yourself why black doesn't make progress here on the king side. Then we can play simply knight to h4. You see we have the tension again here on this long diagonal. The knight is perfectly fine here. The pawn structure is fixed, and even if you try to improve, you have to protect, of course, your g4 pawn. Then it's a problem. You leave also too many dark square problems here on the king side. We can cement maybe our knight again. We can play maybe positionally with bishop to f4 and similar ideas. So kicking away the knight is not an option here. You have to be flexible still on the king side. You have to keep your pawns mobile. You don't want to expose yourself with a move like g4. So in the game, rook to b8, getting out of the range, out of the potential tactical mess here on the long diagonal. So rook to e1, very important move again to battle simply against this backward pawn. Although, as I mentioned, this pawn is protected. It's not a problem about that, but as a long-term plan, it's simply our main goal, to beat the backward pawn. So here knight to f5, we have rook to c1, and now king to h8. You saw always these tactical threats, for instance, if bishop to d5 happens there, so that's why the king gets out of the range of the potential bishop to d5 mess. We have h3, and now knight takes e3, rook to e3. Okay, black has now the bishop pair. Black has equalized the game, I think, but still this backward pawn is there, and you cannot basically activate your bishop pair in such a great shape, I think. First of all, what we should notice is bishop to b7 is always a little bit blocked out by your own pawn, and this bishop, okay, it's aiming here on g3. I think if you want to make something out of this bishop, maybe here to push the pawn somehow, but you saw the problems about the move e5. You cannot make that happen. So you see with these two knights, with this rook here, and with the pawn on d4, white has a powerful control of that particular square. So again, you cannot improve your backward pawn. Knight to f5, kicking away the rook, rook to e2. It's very important now to not to play rook to e1, because we can, from this square rook to e2, we can still use our rook on the c file, because it's obvious that maybe this file could get opened, and then you want to have a rook battery on the c file. You want to have the control of a potential open file that can happen maybe in a couple of moves. Bishop to a3, rook to c3, and now a5. D takes c5 is not an option here, because it seems so that maybe the d4 pawn could hanging, but after b takes c4, you see the bishop is hanging. You have to, you cannot take, will simply take out, and then also the bishop. So far again, black cannot open the position. As we said, we would love for the bishop pair to create an open position, but so far it is not possible. a5, we have queen to b1, and now bishop to d6, we have c5. Very important move here by Stockfish NNUE to lock really the light square bishop. The light square bishop is, as I said, blocked out by the pawn on e6. It is also blocked out by the pawn on d5. So if you try, for instance, to develop here the light square bishop and maybe create a pin, I don't think it brings you so much, because we can simply get out of the range of the pin, and still we could have a very nice protection of the d4. But also you see, so far of course it's not possible because the bishop is hanging, but that's not the point. As I said, even if we create the spin, still I think we can create then a pass pawn after b takes c5, d takes c5, supported with these two rooks. This will be very annoying, I think, to handle or such a supported pass pawn here in the continuation of the game. So that's why here b takes c5, knight to c5. As I said, if you try something like rook to a8, maybe bishop to a6, it's not so good. You don't gain anything. We'll simply get out of the range and create again a very nice battery on the c5. But again, you have to also protect your e6 pawn. So it's really bad position. I think when we watch now the games of the game of Komodo NNUE, because the bishops are not doing anything here. That's the main issue. I think we want to have open files, open diagonals for the bishops. Still, this backward pawn is such a weird one. In the game, queen to e7 has to protect first this idea, and now we have g4, kicking away the knight, knight to g7, and now knight to e1. Very important move to kick away first the knight, because the knight was attacking the pawn on d4, and now again e5 is not possible, because then your d5 is hanging, and we have also this tactical threats on the e file, which is really incredible how Stockfish simply counterplays the common idea of Komodo NNUE. In the game, queen to d8 was played, queen to c1, and now bishop to f4, kicking away the queen, queen to d1, and again bishop to d6. Again, queen to c1, so some perpetuals were played in this particular case. I think Komodo would be satisfied here with a draw. After bishop to d6, we have finally this idea, as I said, rook to c1, very nice rook battery. Again, e5 is not possible, d5 is hanging, so here in the game, knight to e8, and now rook to e3, because the knight has left now the defense of the e6 pawn. Now there are also some tactical threats, because if you try bishop to f4, it's not a problem, because we can simply take rook takes e6, followed with bishop to e6, knight takes e6, and again the fork and on the rook on the queen. So that's why here rook to b6, we have knight to d3, and now knight to g7, again retreating with the bishop a little bit. You see Komodo, I think, made I think too many tempos with the knight now. Meanwhile, white has improved the position of minor pieces. White has improved the position of many pieces. Meanwhile, you have played twice, 3 times with your knight. It's not sometimes good when you don't have a clear idea what to do with your minor piece. In the game a3, we want to create also a further expansion on the queen side, but we want to also cement further our very nice knight on c5. So bishop to b8, queen to e1, bishop to c7 and b4, a takes b, a takes b, and now h5, rook to a2. Very nice move again by Stockfish NNUE, because we want to get use of, again, a new open file. That's how you should play with rooks, getting use simply of open files. Again, I hope you realize, if you try bishop to b7, again, you could face some tactical threats around the square e6. In the game, queen to d6, with also the idea to play queen to h2. But the problem for black is you can maybe play queen to h2, but with after king to f1, you don't have any more checks, so it will be, I think, a necessary loss of tempo again. In the game, rook to a8 was played, and now here, if you try, for instance, let's see, queen to h2, we can simply hide. And if you try f5, it's not so good, because here you can face really a nice tactical shot with knight takes e6. So if you try here knight to e6, then you get rook to c8. You see, you don't have better moves here for black. Rook takes c8, now rook takes e6, and again the queen comes very actively into the game, although you are up the exchange, but this is simply a lost position. You see, first of all, your rook is hanging. We can also try some checks. We can also try bishop to d5, or maybe activate this knight. If this knight comes, for instance, on g6 or on f7, again, it's game over. At least we can grab, I think, a couple of pawns and go into a favorable endgame. So you see, queen to h2 doesn't bring you so much, so that's why here bishop to b8, we have queen to d1, and now comes really the critical moment of the game. Here the Stockfish engine suggests the move h4, which of course blocks the position, and this wasn't played in the game. In the game, Komodo NNUE tried bishop to b7. And we've talked about this move. As I said, first of all, there is no protection of the e6 anymore. Okay, we have attacked the rook, which is of course creating another tempo, but the control of these two centralized knights, I think, is such a great one by STOCKFISH NNUE. And you can guess what STOCKFISH does here. STOCKFISH sacrifices the rook for the exchange, because the dark square bishop of blacks is really a great piece because it has a long diagonal. On the other hand, again, this bishop on b7, it's blocked out by its own pawn. It doesn't have such a great activity. On the other hand, these two knights are perfectly fine, so that's why rook takes b8, rook takes b8, and now h4, breaking the position on the king side. We have now compact position on the queen side. It's time to strike back here on the king side. So let's see possible continuations here. G takes h4. We can simply play rook to f3, attacking the pawn. If you try to play rook to f8, then you get g5. This is very, very tricky because you cannot take here f takes g5. You get simply rook to f8, and after something like queen to f8, you get the fork on d7. That's the main tactical preparation here that STOCKFISH has built. And in this position, if you try, for instance, instead of maybe g takes h4, if you try h takes g4, then queen to g4 comes very active into the game. And again, if you try maybe an e5 pawn breakthrough, there is this problem. We can play, pardon me, if you try e5, still you cannot make that happen. We will simply have too many pieces. Here in this particular moment, maybe g takes h4 can be played, but again, queen to h4, getting another check, and you see now rook to g3. The rook comes very active into the game. You have problems to defend this. If you again try e5, it's not so good because you get queen to h6, and now you see d takes e5. F takes e5 is not possible because your rook is hanging. So these are just some lines that I wanted to show you how great tactically this STOCKFISH engine is prepared. First, it goes positionally into the game, then it catches you with some tactics. Great attacking again by STOCKFISH NNUE. I just wanted to show you some outcomes of potential trades of pieces here on the king side. So as I said, after rook to b8, we have h4. Really a brave idea here by STOCKFISH NNUE. But now we have this idea, rook to f3, as I said, rook to f8 and g5. This line was played in the game. You cannot take. You saw the problems after f takes g5, rook to f8, and knight to d7. So that's why here g6. Look at this pawn. I think it's really one of the most annoying pawns in chess history. Here g6, you cannot attack this pawn. It's simply too much. Here king to g8 was played, and now queen to d2. If you try, for instance, knight to e8, maybe this was slightly better, but still rook to f4 is very risky. And now we can take this pawn, and you see there are also some tactical threats around the square h5. So again, it's a really bad position here for Komodo. So after g6, king to g8 was played, queen to d2. Very important. You see, we're trying to sneak in with the queen here. There are several dark square problems to handle. I hope you realize, look at this bishop, how bad it is. It's like we don't have even the bishop on the board. So that's why it was very important to take out the very active bishop on b8. In the game, rook to a8 was played, and now comes the move queen to h6. It's already a lost position here for black. In the game, knight to e8, rook to h3. We have king to a1, rook to a1. If you try queen to g7 to trade off the queens to simplify the position, it's not a problem. We will simply take this pawn, and then afterwards this pawn. This knight is very active. We can play knight to f4, followed with knight to e6. So simply too many weaknesses. Again, I hope you realize this e6 was the simple plan of STOCKFISH to play against this weakness. So, but in the game here, rook to a1 was played, not a problem. King to h2, a potential queen to c7 can be met with f4. It's again nothing special. f4 is very well protected. Again, rook to h4, rook to h5, and again even threatens some checkmates on h8. So that's why the queen to c7 doesn't bring you so much. So f5, but now you see when you advance the pawn, maybe you have solved one positional problem, but now another comes. You see this knight jumps in on a very active square, knight to e5. We have really cemented two powerful knights, really this octopus knights in the center of the board. Knight to f6, we have rook to h4, queen to g7, but again, we don't want to trade off more pieces. Queen to g5, now bishop to a6, a really desperate try. We'll give that was pathetic sound. So the bishop wants to go into the game, but it's simply too late. You see, these knights are controlling the whole center of the board. In the game, bishop to f3, also attacking here the weak pawn on h5. Here, bishop to b5, we have bishop takes h5, and now bishop to e8, finally protecting everything because we want to have some kind of a defensive piece in front of the king. In the game, king to g2, we have rook to e1, and now bishop to f3, simply improving the position of our minor piece, rook to b1, and now bishop to e2. And this move, bishop to e2, is really such a great maneuver by STOCKFISH NNUE, because when we always evaluate positions, we always should see which piece is good, which piece is not good. So I hope you realize these knights are perfectly fine. The rook is very active. The queen is there. It's very dangerous in front of black's king. So the only piece, really, the only piece that needs improvement is the bishop. And here you see STOCKFISH NNUE will find such a great way how to activate the bishop, because now bishop to a6, and now you see bishop to c8, really going all over the board and attacking simply again this weak e6 pawn. In the game, rook to b6 protecting this, but now rook to h3, again trying to improve another piece on the board. Rook to c6, we have knight takes c6, sacrificing the rook for the exchange in order to make something happen. But now bishop to e6 wins the game simply here for STOCKFISH, because you have to give up again more and more material. But here, after queen to g6, bishop to g6, and now rook to h6, simply attacking the bishop. King to f7 had to be played, but now knight to f4, this is really already losing. In the game, knight to e4 was played, simply giving up the bishop. The best way here maybe is bishop to h7, but again, knight to d5 wins the game immediately, deflecting the knight, of course, from the defense of the bishop. Knight to d5, rook takes h7 with two pawns, and the rook against with the knight and the pawn. It's, of course, a completely winning endgame here for white. So let's give that a finish him and fatality. It's game over. Great attack again by the fish. Great strategies first applied, and then strike back with some tactics. That's, I think, this new the new beauty of the STOCKFISH NNUE version, that it doesn't go immediately into this straightforward as attacks. It plays really prophylactic moves, then builds up really the attack, improves the position of minor pieces, and then strikes back with some great tactics. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. This was the derby of this tournament so far. These are now the two best champions. As promised, I'm going to show you now the current standings. Here you see STOCKFISH is on the first place with 33 points. Mystery Engine, or this KOMODO NNUE version, is on the second place, 31 points, and here Liechtenstein 29 points, and Lila C0, you can see 28.5 points only after 52 games. Still, maybe if Lila C0 even wins the games, here you see the games, 52 games has Lila played. If Lila wins two more, maybe it can go on the third place, but still it will be behind the KOMODO NNUE version and this STOCKFISH version. So as I said, for Lila fanboys, this is not simply now its tournament. KOMODO and STOCKFISH are now the best engines, and I'm looking forward to see more and more of these games, because they're really beautiful, they're really immortal, and I think we'll have really some great fun in the future. So okay, if you want to see more brutal and tactical and positional games like this, check out my commented chess game series. Here's the link. And if you don't like maybe so much this engine games, check out my commented chess games played by humans, this best chess games of all time series. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.